Welcome to Dear SQL DBA, a podcast for SQL Server database administrators and developers. I'm Kendra Little, and I'm an evangelist at Redgate Software and the creator of SQLworkbooks.com. In today's episode, what I've got is a recording I did from my first ever live Twitch stream. I'm excited to start more live streaming on Twitch, and although this recording isn't perfect, I'm going to work on improving the audio quality next time. I think it's pretty good, and I hope you enjoy it. I thought a really fun thing to do would be to take a topic that I've been hearing a lot of questions about lately, which is the ever popular topic for DBAs. I've been hearing a lot about this lately, but it's not like it's a new topic. It's the question of whether database administrator jobs are going to go away or whether we'll still have these jobs in the future. This fear of like things are happening that are going to end jobs. Now, these days, I hear about this in a different context than I heard about them before. And I want to talk about just different things that feel like they might be like, oh, maybe this means DBAs won't have jobs anymore, and kind of go through it and say, is it a threat or is it actually an opportunity? There are, I think, some threats out there to jobs, but it's essentially just different components, things that may take a person to do them right now that maybe won't take a person to do them forever. So let's dive on in and talk about some things and get them on this little map here. So one thing that I actually think is an actual threat is managed instances. Especially, I work in the SQL Server world primarily, the Microsoft Data Platform world. And managed instances in SQL Server are kind of a way that the robots are taking over. So this is, a little beep, beep, boop, boop robot here, because what this robot is doing in managed instances is it is taking over some of the tasks that may have required a considerable amount of expertise, that still do require a considerable amount of expertise, but it's kind of offloading them. So managed instances in the Microsoft Cloud are basically a set of Azure SQL databases. And you also get things like linked servers, and it's a lot like an on-premises SQL Server, but they take care of a lot of things for you around high availability and backups. So specifically for tasks like high availability and backups, let's see if I can shrink this down here because it is a threat, but I don't want it to take up the whole screen there. When it comes to, backups, if we think about this, like way back in the day when DBAs started out, we didn't have a lot of automation or things around backups. You really did kind of need an expert to figure out what recovery model should I be using, how should these backups be configured and set up and run on a regular basis, from full backups to log backups, maybe differential backups, depending on what you're doing. And how do I manage these, make sure they're good, retain the right amount? Now, those things are still important, but even if you're doing it yourself these days, we've got a lot of documentation out there. We've got a lot of scripts you can adopt to ease the automation of it yourself. But now we've also got things like cloud offerings that say, oh, you tell us how much data is acceptable to use, and we'll set that up for you. We'll set up your availability groups for you. We'll set up all this fancy stuff that's hard for you in-house. So if I move from managing my SQL servers on premises to managing a managed instance, well, I don't have that much management anymore. Now, yeah, I am going to pay for that managed instance. It's not like this comes for free. But it is true that people who are running IT departments, if they're thinking about costs, they are going to evaluate, hey, what are the costs of using that service versus the cost of hiring a person? So I do think that when it comes to specific parts of the job, this is a threat. But I don't think it's a threat to the whole job. This is really threatening what? It's threatening backups and high availability, right? Those are the things that are being threatened there. It's not tuning your SQL Server code for you. Well, maybe it's not. All right, let's go on to another threat there. And we're gonna undo those there because I want to actually put those on another level because we want to manage those as well. So what are the skills that are threatened there? I'm gonna Bob Ross you here and say, let's pick a happy little color right there. So the skills that are threatened by managed instances, there's backup, there's high availability, and Azure SQL Database, there is kind of some interesting stuff going on in there. And this is not only, this part I'm talking about is not necessarily all only in Azure SQL Database. Some of this is moving its way into boxed product or on-prem SQL Server itself in terms of automatic tuning. There's a couple features they're working with there that have to do with things like, does it look like maybe an index would help with this workload? So I'm going to put auto tuning on this list. It's not in the most mature state today. So let's put a question mark around it. Because I actually think today the automatic tuning things that are available are really a helper to a performance tuner rather than a replacement for a performance tuner. Is that execution plan in cache? Does it look like there's a problem with it? Maybe I should use a different plan. Questions like that. The real way that these things are set up right now, the idea is that automatically the SQL Server, which maybe is in the cloud, maybe isn't for this feature. This is one of the ones that's gone into on-prem. But like if it looks like that plan isn't good for all the queries running, maybe it'll log it for you so that you can draw attention to it, but then also go to what looks like a more stable plan. And the idea there is really, and this is in the docs too, it's not saying, hey, we're going to do all of your performance tuning for you. It's saying more like, we're going to try to temporarily do something and freeze a plan, and we're going to log it to a table so that you can look at it later. And it is important for you to look at it later because really what we want is to stabilize things so that we don't have a bad plan and a good plan, or we don't have a plan that sometimes has slow queries running against it, right? The plan isn't inherently bad. The question is whether the queries using the plan are consistently fast. So there's some features to try to help us do this. But at this point, looking at those features, we can imagine a world where it gets better and better at that. And maybe before too long, maybe it is better because there are features both in the automatic indexing and in the plan stability. So maybe later on, it gets better at saying, so this is sometimes fast and sometimes slow. We've got multiple plans here. To stabilize this, we should change that index over there, and then we'll have a stable plan. It's not impossible to imagine that happening. So, not all threats are immediate. That's more of a longer term threat there. And I do think with these databases as a service in the cloud, which may be offered on something like a managed instance that lets you query between the databases, right? Because with Azure SQL Database, the difficulties in querying between the databases has been somewhat painful. There is a preview feature that lets you do it with Elastic Database queries, but we can kind of see maybe some of those DBA tasks being offloaded down the road there. So those, I think, are legitimate things to be concerned about. Now, I don't mean be concerned as in you should find another job because you're not going to be a DBA for long. I just mean it's interesting to think about for multiple reasons. Reasons like maybe you should be identifying cases where this is helpful for your employer, right? Like as a database administrator, our job isn't to persist doing the exact same tasks we've always done. Our task is to figure out, one, what's good things we need to do to secure and protect the data to make sure we aren't going to have data loss, right? Ensuring that we know for our organization and for given sets of data, how much data is acceptable to lose, how much downtime is acceptable to have, and then figuring out what are the right ways to meet that. That strategy is a big part of what we need to do. And figuring out the technologies that help us meet that strategy at the right level of cost is important too. So keeping up with these things that may help us do that with cost is part of our role in terms of being an architect, and there might be ways that this is helpful to us that we also want to recommend there too. So it's important to keep up with this, not just out of the idea that it's a threat to us, but also it's a tool that we can use. Now, if, let's say that we're in a more advanced state and things have gone this direction where we have options for automated, backups, automated, high availability. Let's say there's always wrinkles with these things. Let's say it's really good at making sure we don't get data corruption, and it's got more and more advanced tuning things as well. Imagine a world where you didn't have to configure max degree of parallelism and figure out, hey, how many cores are generally right and where should I set all these thresholds? Imagine a world where the SQL Server was smart enough to look at your workloads and automatically set and tune a lot of these things that right now actually requires a pretty experienced person to do. So imagine that, we've gone down this world or this road farther and farther. What are the opportunities in that? Well, opportunities. Okay, so in here, we do have different opportunities, and let's choose a different happy little color for our opportunities. Let's go more into a green area for the opportunities. So, one opportunity is just recommending the right platform, and that it does not say opportunity there. So we'll just do op for opportunity. Spelling's hard. So opportunity is, choosing, making the recommendation, because with a lot of these things involving services, if we're offloading things and saying, hey, you vendor there, maybe the vendor's Microsoft, maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's Google, but you who offer this database service for me, I want you to take over my backups and my high availability. Whether or not they're doing this with people behind the scenes or with magic machine learning and artificial intelligence, probably some mix thereof, right? We have kind of a similar thing that, like this old conversation we've had with offshoring is, okay, choosing the right service provider is key. And the more and more we have artificial intelligence in the mix and we have different service providers providing different things, the more that figuring out, choosing the service, which service is right for us at which level of cost, even within the same provider, even right now. Okay, if I'm going to use Microsoft Azure, for instance, do I want a managed instance? Do I want Azure SQL database? Do I want a mix of those? Do I want some VMs in there? And what are the pros and cons of them? This is actually tricky. So for example, okay, let's say I do want to offload a lot of this stuff with managed instances. Let's say I'm going for that, and the price of the managed instance for production itself is good for me. Well, there's a lot more questions that come back to this when it comes to managing the data, its security, its availability. Okay, do I want to use all managed instances for my different environments, right? Do I want to pay for managed instances for dev, for QA, for test, for pre-production? Okay, well maybe I do want to pay for it for pre-production, but maybe these bills are piling up. So now I'm paying for managed instances for my customer-facing things. I've got a staging / pre-production environment where I'm also paying, and maybe that's at a lower rate because it's dev, QA, and test, but maybe I do want to combine this with an on-prem model to save money. Well, how do I do that, right? If I want to take data out, well, right now, maybe this will change in the future, but right now, there's no backup I can take from the databases in my managed instances that's a little simple .back file that I can just import to my on-prem environment. Maybe I can use a backpack to export all the data, but what if some of my databases in there are 100 gigs or 200 gigs? It's not that unusual to have multi-terabyte databases anymore, so wait a second, this is getting complicated. This sounds like maybe I would need an expert to manage all of these databases in my environments. What is the right place to keep them? And if I'm mixing anything, if I'm mixing any different solution providers, how do I get that to work? What levels of, or how similar do my environments need to be? And how am I managing the data flow between these environments? That still sounds like a pretty valid DBA job as well. So that's definitely, I think, an opportunity there. So that, I think, is a big one. Other opportunities, And maybe let's just do, 100 shades of green here. So we'll do a new little layer here. Another big opportunity with this, and it's a little bit related, is automation. These days, I'm a little biased in this. And what does, automation look like? Well, it is more robots, right? But these robots are more of a friendly robot, I think. A robot that you are using to set up things yourself. So this one, maybe it's like an octopus here. This is your helper automation. And maybe I'm thinking of an octopus because of tools like Octopus Deploy. Now, full disclosure, I'm an evangelist for Redgate Software, and we provide tools for automation for people. So I think a lot about automation just naturally as parts of my job. But in a world where we need to work with tools that are becoming smarter and smarter, to me, what I think is the big opportunity is to be the one who understands the strengths and weaknesses of these tools, in part for choosing the service. And I'm mixing my layers here, so things always get a little muddy. In part for doing things like saying, what is the right service here? And let's go back and we'll fix that. But also, not just that cost thing, but how are we going to get things to work together with the least amount of delay and the least amount of manual work between them? So this happens in terms of not only the data flowing between those environments, like, hey, we need to repopulate the QA environment. What's the best way to do that? And to make sure that we're masking data, that only the data that needs to get into the QA environment is getting there, like things like that. But also things like, what are the best ways to release and manage database code? This is an area I've been learning a ton about lately as I work with the Redgate tools, and it's actually really, really fun to learn about. And you might think, well, that's a developer's job. And the more I learn about it, the more I think, well, it is kind of a developer job, but it's really a specialist job, a database specialist job. And maybe that's a developer who's a database specialist, but maybe it's a DBA who's a little bit of a developer too. I think you can be on either side and get into that world so here's an example problem. And I would actually love to do a future whiteboarding session on this specific problem itself. So it's a problem of, okay, let's say we use transactional replication in our environment, or merge replication, one of the two, but we do have places in replication. And so what are the best practices for automating deployments of code involving replication? Now, at first glance, it might seem like, oh, that's not hard. The devil is in the details, though. So first off, we want to get our database code into source control. Now, for existing code bases, that can be a bit of work. But let's just imagine, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to have this in source control. Well, one of the things with SQL Server's replication is, unless you turn it off, there are schema changes that are, if you change schema of an object at a publisher, that schema change is going to flow through to the subscriber just via replication. You don't have to go in and, I added a column at the publisher, it will add it at the subscriber for me. And it is a nice thing that replication does this, because if you ever have to do something like take an article out of replication to make a modification to it, there's a lot of singing and dancing involved with getting the article out, making sure things happen, putting the article back in, re-snapshotting, and all of that stuff. So it's pretty convenient to let replication do this. If I am letting replication do that, though, and I have other tables that aren't replicated. So I do want to be able to, on that subscriber database, I do want to automatically deploy other changes to it. So the question here is, what is the best approach for making schema changes to these tables? Do you want to let replication pass that change through and use some combination of smart filters to say, oh, don't deploy changes to these tables in the subscriber if they're replicated? Or do you want to turn off the ability for replication to put those changes through and do all those changes manually? And if so, if you do that second approach, how are you going to handle things like, how do you know when you need to remove an article from replication to make the change, or if it's just safe to make the change yourself? So this is, I'm not gonna go into the answers of that today. I'm still actually on that one. I think there's going to be cases when you might want to do different things with it. But it's just an example of the case where you're really going to want to be a specialist who knows that technology well, who gets to know it well, and who also understands how the particular way that you are automating changes, whether you're automating changes with Redgate's database tools you've built in-house, some other tools, knowing how those work with it, and paying attention and kind of looking around and being aware of, is the way we're doing this the best way, or has an easier way come out? That is still absolutely a specialist role, and I think that's very much still a place where DBAs are going to shine there. So I think automation is a huge opportunity, and that getting better and better at that really even means the more I'm good at automation, and I'm not super fond of this color of yellow here, the more that I understand about automation, the more that if I want to move to new technologies that maybe offload some of the work, or if I want to move away from them to something else, figuring out how to implement that takes me less work because I'm already familiar with a lot of tools that are kind of plumbing for getting rid of manual labor there. Now, there is our old friend. There's a risk who's our old frenemy, and that is the risk of, and maybe we should go darker when it comes to this risk again. Maybe we should just, I don't think this risk ever goes away. And this is the risk of outsourcing. Outsource-roo, let's call it, just to make it a little friendlier. There, has been a long history of companies, not just in the United States, but in the world, having their leaders say, IT costs too much. We are going to move our IT to offshore or nearshore or midshore, whatever you want to do. Essentially, we found some people to do this service for us, and we're going to pay those people instead of paying you, right? No matter where we live in the world, there might be someone somewhere else in the world who will do it cheaper. And the internet, the growing powers of the internet and the ability to screen share and have 24/7 operations and have people working for you globally does make that easier. So this risk, this one isn't new. I've seen companies do this my entire time working in IT, and I don't think it's going away. But there's an interesting thing happening these days, and it's related to the automation. Companies who are getting into digital transformations these days. So maybe let's do some purple for digital transformation. We'll have a happy little digital transformation here. The interesting thing about a digital transformation is that it's not necessarily cheap. And the word digital transformation, it's going on and on and on down the page. This phrase has been going on and on too. You may have heard people mentioning this phrase in keynotes for years. Digital transformation is the buzzword that keeps on giving. But the thing about digital transformation is when you look into what does this actually mean, what do CEOs mean when they talk about digital transformation? Are they talking about replacing people with robots? Well, maybe there's cost savings in there, but a lot of what people think about and talk about is how do we maximize the value of the people who innovate, and how do we connect everyone in the company with the people who innovate? So here's the thing. The thing is that highly skilled people are expensive. Whether we are hiring these highly skilled people in our hometown or we're hiring them around the world. If we want them to innovate, they are probably not going to be super cheap. And if we want them to innovate, we might not want all of them to be separated from one another. We might want them to be highly collaborative, and we might even want them to be more in our neighborhood so we can all get them in a room. Now, trust me, I love working remotely. I love working from home. I also travel quite a bit so that I can get FaceTime with people, though. And being able to get creative people who often can be together and get a lot of value out of them is more the focus now, rather than treating IT as a cost center where we need to shave things off and save money. For manual tasks, for tasks that could be automated, we do want to not pay people directly for those. We don't want to pay people to do backups if they can be automated. We don't even want to pay people to set up high availability if we can be automated. We want people to come up with architecture designs and understand why the best architecture is the best. We want more highly skilled people. So there's a real opportunity, especially if you've already started as a DBA, because you're already on the path to becoming that more highly skilled architect, or that person who can put together pipelines of releases and changes that flow through things. Digital transformation is about really unlocking that creativity and about saying, hey, our company needs to be able to test new ideas really quickly, or some little startup is going to come around and do what Uber and Lyft are doing to public transportation and cab companies right now. We need to figure out how to be able to test different things with our users and see what really works, what makes them really want to do our products in a way where we aren't having to do these really long cycles. And this is happening in really interesting ways. So when we think about outsourcing, one thing that we think about with outsourcing is factory work, right? So there's outsourcing of tech jobs, but even before that, in terms of factories went away, right? I was listening to, I think this podcast episode, I'm pretty sure this one was part of the Forrester podcast series. They have a podcast series I really like. And they were talking about just sneaker manufacturing on one episode. A lot of sneakers are no longer made in the United States. They mentioned that some sneaker companies are starting to test building their sneakers in the United States again. Not because making them is cheaper. Making them is not cheaper. But because in the world of sneakers these days, you don't just want to make a so-so sneaker. You want to make a sneaker that people are really big fans of. And it's hard to tell. You don't know what sneaker is going to go viral until you've got it out there, right? It's hard to predict the perfectly addictive sneaker. So it becomes more important, not necessarily to make money. It becomes important to not necessarily have the cheapest manufacturing of the sneaker, but to be able to get a new sneaker to the audience faster. So maybe one model that might be really, really valuable, and people are testing this out apparently, is, okay, maybe if I make my factory closer to the consumers, but I make the factory in a way that it can produce different designs more quickly, I can try out different models of sneakers, and the ones that are catching on, I then can start producing a lot of them fast, because I can react much more quickly, even though my operations are more expensive. So because the internet and people carrying around very smart little computers in their pocket have made comparison shopping so much easier. And because we're moving into a culture where people want the newest, fastest thing much more quickly, paying for things at home instead of, not outsourcing things, but resisting the urge to outsource and saying, how can we do this smarter at a way that makes us more money, is becoming a very valid thought pattern to the leaders of these companies. So what does this mean to those of us who work as database administrators? Well, a lot of what it means is it isn't just about building the same basic sneaker, doing the manual tasks that could be done by someone else. In fact, the opportunity is recognizing when things I do could be done better by something else, making sure we have time to learn about it. Setting goals. Like, oh, okay, so I know, going into your review, whenever you do your review, say, I know we may not have time to adopt this technology right now, but I think this may become relevant to us soon. So I want part of my goal for next year, I want to be measured on, I'm going to learn about this topic. I'm going to take time out. I'm going to figure out how to make that happen in my week. I'm going to do some lunch and learns for our teams talking about how this new technology works. And even if we're not ready for it, where it might make sense for us in the future and where it doesn't. And you can scope and scale that however you want. Now, notice that very much sharing is part of this. This really isn't about just learning it yourself, because when you're looking at different opportunities, whether they're in your company, whether they're in another company, just being able to say, oh, I know how this technology works. It's not that cool if you haven't used it, right? It's great to know how something works. Now, but we can't adopt we can't adopt all technologies at all jobs. It's just not going to happen. But having made some presentations or having built a prototype, that goes a lot longer for something than saying, oh, I haven't used it yet, but I know X. If I'm going to either build a prototype or build some models or make a proposal for something, now that's more to talk about than, oh, I haven't used it yet. It may not have made it to production, but if you've kicked the tires and created a prototype, especially if you've done it in a way that you can share exactly what you prototyped out, you're not using confidential data in it or confidential things within your company. One of the cool things about doing a prototype is you can often use samples and things that are more suitable to share publicly. And that's even desirable because then we're not spreading, confidential things where we shouldn't. Then you can really talk about what you did and what you tested, whether or not it was, productionalized. Be open and clear. Don't say you did something you didn't, but that is really a part of the opportunity of getting in there. So I really think there are threats to DBA jobs for sure. But I think this has always been true because of our old friend Outsourcing, and also just due to the nature of jobs change. Jobs change over time. What it is to be a database administrator these days, it's different than it was 10 years ago. The same thing goes for developer jobs too. But one thing is going to stay the same. There is a constant. I think this is going to absolutely remain a constant. So let's see, what color should we do for things that are constant? Maybe our constant should just be in red. The constant is that developers have too much to learn. So devs have too much to keep up with. That's not going to change. I think that the future of the DBA job is that the DBA job is going to be a specialist area for a DevOps person. I hate to use the DevOps word, but for a person who does some coding and thinks a lot about architecture and how things work. And that role, I very much believe, will persist because developers have so much to keep up with. Whether you're a developer who's a front-end developer and you're having to worry about browser compatibility, or whether you're a .NET stack developer and you're having to think about, okay, what are the new ways I could do this? Working with the data and managing the data is always going to be special because managing data schemas is inherently different than managing a lot of the rest of code. And I will get into that in more detail in a future stream here. So this is the very first Twitch stream I've ever done. And it's probably time to call this to a close. I have gotten a fair amount mapped out here. That's pretty good. So I am interested in doing more of these in the future. And I'm going to see what I can do with the recording. And if you're listening to this, thanks for listening. I'm Kendra Little, and I'll see you again another time soon. Thanks, folks.